We are actually at our final segment for this day one, and it is the fireside chat. Caribbean safeguards. And as I mentioned before, Mrs. Aguilera is on the panel, but who else is on the panel with her this evening? So we have Mr. Yacine Khelladi, who is the coordinator and board member of Fundación Taigüey of the Dominican Republic, and also a member of the Caribbean Open Institute. Joining them is also Dr. Kim Mallalieu, a senior lecturer here at the University of the West Indies. Let's welcome our panel one more time. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.
All right. So here we are with the most important session of the whole day. Yes, because when you do all these CPIs, have you thought about what can go wrong and how it will fail or it could fail? So this is a little bit the meaning of this chat here, to look at what are the risks, the vulnerabilities, and how we can assess them and address them, and what are they're very particular to the Caribbean. I mean, the particularities of the Caribbean when we look at vulnerabilities and risk of implementing DPIs, and in the framework of the safeguards that were developed last year. I don't know if I have to introduce Kim. Everybody knows Kim, right? Uh, and Ginsy just had a wonderful presentation about the progress of DPI in Dominican Republic. So I don't think we need to go through a long presentation of our two. And I'm very happy to have two ladies here to contribute to the gender balance of all the panels and all the conference. Also, it's been very important, and I'm very happy that today we had quite balanced all days and no manuals, because I cannot participate in a manual by commitment. So I'm very happy to be here with my two colleagues. So is this working? Yeah. So last year, and I know Kim was was even one of the drafting rapporteur or drafters of this report that was presented last year. That is the DPA safeguards framework with the UN, right? United Nations led work. I'm just going to very quickly. You are familiar with this framework? No. So very quickly, the framework. Who is not familiar at all? No. Oh, okay. So Kim is part of the writing thing. I think Matthew was also there. Armando was also there. They spent 2 years in working groups to develop this framework, right? About anyway. So the framework has principles, identify risks, analyze the life cycle of the implementation of DPIs, talks about the stakeholders and the responsibilities all along this life cycle in making sure that they are well implemented, and provides recommendations on the processes and the practice to make sure that DPIs are well implemented. Dimension, risk principles, life cycle, and stakeholders or responsible authority are well detailed in this document. You will find it online very easily. And this maybe is where we can just stop a little bit to understand 3 types of risk that the report structures or identifies and addresses. Safety, so privacy, insecurity, physical insecurity, so the infrastructure, lack of resources or recourse, which is when there's a problem, you can go back to where. The risks to inclusion, so discrimination, inequality in access, exclusion, and disempowerment. So that's implementing a DPI. You can have this happen, and also more societal or ecosystem risk or systemic risk with the structural vulnerabilities here. Distrust, weak rule of law, weak institutions, technical shortcomings, and sustainability, which are dangers for our DPI implementation. Am I correct, Professor? Yeah, sorry. Yes, and then they make a whole analysis of the ecosystem, etc., etc. I'm not going to spend, the idea is not to make a presentation, but I just wanted to have that we have this in mind, that this is the framework, or this is the what we're talking about here, right? Those risks. So my first question for my two panelists is, what are the most, of all those risks and vulnerabilities that we know exist, what are the most pressing ones today in when you are starting implementing DPIs in Dominican Republic, in Trinidad, or in the Caribbean in general? So the goal is to have a specifically Caribbean analysis or point of view or bias when we look at these risks. Which are the risks that are very specific in your countries and in the Caribbean in particular?
So as the framework said, all the risk and vulnerability are universal, both depending on the situation, the country, the people, the laws inclusive. This vulnerability can be more can be more used, that can be achieved or can be executed. For example, in the case of Dominican Republic, when we are developing DPI, we have some most pressing risk, I think, is the lack of interoperability in between the government system and the government with the private sector. For example, as I show during my presentation, the two situations happen in my country. We don't have a unified record for health. We don't have unified record for education. So this causing a lot of stress and limit the economic growth of the country. And I think that this lack in interoperability is not also for my country. I think Trinidad and Tobago face the same, and the Caribbean island also. Additionally, I can say that we have a low maturity in data governance. So this limit also, or that the citizen build trust in government. When you don't have a good management of data, you are in the risk to misuse the information, or also uh, violate or no respect the human right. Additionally, we have some rural area in our border, so the access to the public public services in this area are limited for the lack of digital skill, and also for the lack of digital infrastructure that allow the citizen to access to the digital solution that we are building in the country. We have a lot of centralized institution at the institution, and also digital implementation and infrastructure at the city, Santo Domingo. So we need to expand this to the rural area to allow and to secure that all the solutions that we are building are accessible, are available for all Dominican citizens.
So I think from the point of view of Trinidad and Tobago, I guess you're asking, yeah, and I think it applies to all Caribbean countries. If we were to go back to the penultimate slide that Yacine showed, you would see that the framework, the universal DPI safeguards framework, looks at three categories of risks. Two categories are individual risk to a person, and then another, and one is about safety, one category, another is about inclusivity, and the third bucket was structural vulnerabilities. And I'd like to, I guess, address that issue, because that is, I think, the biggest issue. And I say that because if the structural vulnerabilities were not there, then you could realize the safety and the inclusivity that is represented in the other two buckets. So let's look at structural vulnerability. One of them is rule of law, another is institutional strength, another is sustainability. Let's look at sustainability. From my point of view, DPI, the measure of DPI success is its sustainability. So you can look at it to say that for sustainability, DPI needs to be blah, blah, blah. But I prefer to say for DPI to succeed, it must be sustainable. And by this, there are, from my point of view, 3 dimensions of sustainability. One is value. If DPI does not have value, it cannot be sustained. Another is the experience of the user. Yeah. If the experience is negative, particularly in the early days, there could not be sustainability. And the last is trust. So these 3, the value, I must see value. Maria and Juan see value directly. The experience. So you might give Maria and Juan the value, but the experience is horrid. They will not come back. So experience, value, and then and trust. And I believe Matthew, when I was on a plane coming here this morning, spoke a lot about trust. So when you ask me about the most significant risks, I will say the most significant risks are all of those that present barriers to our achieving these things. The value of DPI at the individual human level is the experience that individual humans have in interacting with the DPI and the trust that we have. And if you go back to the final bucket in the framework, you will see the aspects of those structural vulnerabilities, for example, rule of law and institutional strength. And these, there is room for improvement, and those represent risks. Yacine.
Great, thank you. My next question is, how is there something unique or different, or how the Caribbean is responding or is building the process in response to these vulnerabilities, to these risks? Are there elements specific to the small island development states, so to small territories, to small economies, that we need to understand?
Yes, from my point of view, I think that the way that the Caribbean is adopting more structured DPI approach is good. They are working in a region coordination for all the implementation in DPI. This morning, I don't remember what was the speaker, but I think was a woman. She said that don't reinvent the wheels. So we don't need to reinvent the wheels. In the Caribbean, we have the similar challenge, we have the similar context, so we can't share our knowledge, we can share our system. And I think this is a unique form that Caribbean island are facing the challenge in the region.
Just came back from Paraguay, for example. Are those challenges in the way they are addressed different from what they are doing in Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, large countries, continental countries, Latin countries, than what the Caribbean, to address those challenges, those risks?
The circumstances are different, and the responses have some commonalities and some differences. The significant difference is that our Caribbean region represents, I think, 16 of all of the SIDS in the world, yeah, which is a huge amount. There are no Latin American countries that are not Caribbean that are SIDS. So the problems that SIDS live with are not the problems that Latin American countries that are not SIDS live with. So, for example, our major problem is scale. Our small size impacts every single thing, and it impacts everything through all cycles, vertical and horizontal. Human capacity. You know, let me try to focus here because I want to go off, but I know we don't have time. Human capacity, the size of our markets, right? and very much so the strength of our voice amidst the significant powers of the world. Very much relevant right now. So our circumstances are different, and therefore we need different approaches. You could take Brazil. Brazil does not need to work in collaboration with its neighbors to the extent that we do. We cannot survive, particularly nowadays. We cannot survive. Our SIDS, Caribbean SIDS, cannot survive unless we collaborate. The large countries, particularly in South America, do not have such a pressing need.
I think that there's something there. Capacities, I've been around the region also for 30 years. and going from country to country and going to ministries where you have one or two persons that are dealing with digital transformation, ICT, e-government, AI, community access, universal meaningful connectivity, what else? Gender inclusion, gender digital inclusion. And then now you add, and you have DPI, safeguards and risks. And it's the one person that is doing everything, or the one office that is trying to do everything and address, I don't know, tons of problems. How can we address that? I mean, I think the capacity, and that's one thing. And the other thing is, because I go and I have friends here from Mexico, Uruguay, Chile, and you go there and you have civil society groups and organizations that are helping address some of these difficulties. For example, the inclusion, equity, everything. You have civil society groups that are active and that are dedicated to these issues: digital inclusion, gender digital inclusion, digital rights. We don't have that in the Caribbean. We don't have civil society groups that are strongly collaborating with government in a multi-stakeholder approach to address these risks. So what can we do? Which capacities do we need to build, or how can we get those both at the government and at the civil society to address these risks and make sure that DPI are well implemented and we reach our targets and goals? I mean, is that something? I don't know. It's a reflection. We had a chat here. Huh?
Yes,
So
I
this was
think
not
that
prepared.
you're right, and I think that we have in the region a lot of good resources, technical resource to build technology. But I think we need a capacity in a strategy level to understand very well how is DPI, how it impacts life, and how DPI is connect with all the initiative that the government has been doing for a long time. For example, in my presentation, I showed the Digital Agenda 2030, and this was launched on 2022. And this digital agenda have all the elements for foundational DPI. But the term of DPI thus was so relevant at this moment of the um, creation of this strategy. So you need to present to the high level personnel the importance, the impact of DPI, and create knowledge in this aspect as a strategic level, I think.
Yeah. So my response to what I believe is a question is that is everything. It's everything. And that is what we need is to address the issues at every level. So we do need the policies, the enabling environment, the entire enabling environment, the policy, the regulations, the strategy, the plan. We need all of that. As you said, you need to have high level leadership support. You can't survive without it. But you also need to percolate down the stack, no pun intended, but you need to percolate down and get all of the laterals, all through the verticals, all the way down to the human beings. And that requires stewardship, which is something that we don't think of. But stewardship is very, very important. You can't only rely, for example, on the formal education system. Either for the persons who are implementing DPI or the persons who are providing the services or even the end users. You can't rely on simply structured educational and training systems. You need to include things like stewardship. So all of the very formal structures and frameworks that we are familiar with, from the highest level to the lowest level, but also laterally, so that in addition to the formal structures, we have all of the fuzzy structures that really are imperative to give people the comfort and the trust and the interest in subscribing.
Can you develop what are those fuzzy structures
Yeah.
you mentioned, just
Yeah.
to understand?
So, for example, if you come down the stack, then you can say, well, one of the things we need to train everybody at the ministry because we are implementing DPI services that are being provided by this ministry or this organization. So let's come in there and do training. So we tick the box and we say training. But training alone cannot do it.
Okay.
DPI and open source are built on a psychology and a philosophy of openness. You can't teach that in a classroom. It is a cultural adoption that you need. And you can't do that using your formal structures. So you need this fuzziness where you are really manipulating culture. And that is what you need at all levels in the ranks, from the policymakers, ownership, leadership, all the way to the implementers. They have to understand and absorb and own a culture of openness, not just DPI or an X road or a DPG, but the whole culture of openness. And
that's interesting. I mean, I remember from all the open data thing we have tried to do for the last 15 years or something, where people sitting on data and say, this is my data. No, this is not your data. This is the health data or the education data. No, this is my data. And I'm trying to transpose now, I mean, the effort we had to do, and we have not succeeded every time, but we have done some efforts to have people, okay, the more data you give, the best you will also receive, and your work or your objectives, your institutional objectives or whatever will be better. Trying to convince people that they have to change the way they function to be able to get the most out of this. So probably when you go to DPI, you will see people say, oh, this is my system, this is my API, it's my process, and I don't want to share my, I don't know. So I'm trying to see what are the parallel here between.
You see, and there's so many parallels. And I mean, the whole issue of sovereignty is a big one, very charged, highly charged. But for us in the Caribbean, one of our downfalls is a level of comfort that we've had for a long time, where we can get by with other people's solutions. It was a comfort zone that we've lived in for a long time. We can get by with other people's solutions. We don't have to manufacture our own. We don't have to design and build our own. That's a comfort zone. When COVID hit, that was a wake-up call for everyone. And before COVID, we perhaps would never have contemplated doing what we did because we had to in COVID. And I'm saying to you today that today, on the 8th or 8th of April 2025, I think it's staring us in the face that there are things that were uncomfortable and therefore we did not do before. But in April 2025, it's time for us to get up and say, we need to build locally, yeah, as uncomfortable as it is. And we need to think of this not for only for today, because it's hard, but for tomorrow. Yeah. So it's not about just the open data as we did in those days, Maurice, you, me, going in the trenches and preaching the gospel. But now it is that we have to really preach the gospel of a cultural change, behavioral change through choice that is that reaches beyond DPGs, open data, open source, etc.
Okay, so let me just one last. I mean, we still have 2:30 at 23. So let me see my three last questions in one. If we want to have a practical collaboration, I said, between Dominican Republic and Trinidad, how would you see it work? Would it be more valuable than collaborating with, I don't know, the UK, US, China, India, or or it's just a different value? And how in practice would you what would you need, or how would you build a practical collaboration within Caribbean?
Yes, I think that all kind of collaboration is valuable, but at the region, if we can collaborate with the country in the Caribbean, it's more valuable because we share the same context. As I said before, we share the same context. We face the same challenges or similar challenges, and the cultural history. So I think that can be very interesting seeing a pilot program in DPI, for example, interoperable trans-border interoperable system to facilitate the way how our countries make commerce for migration system. So I think that can be interesting. We have a lot of idea, but I think that we don't have a lot of time. But I think that we can, and we are doing so because Dominican Republic is in this event. So this is a proof that we are working together in this.
So I think it's simple. Just do it. So don't, as we say in Trinidad, don't over maths. Don't overthink. No analysis paralysis. Just do it. Do it by sharing now, discussing now. Don't overplan. Agree now, and then steward. Again, I come back to this word, steward, which is to say, let's say that Jamaica, DR, Trinidad and Tobago just started to share. No commitment, no obligation, no drama. We just start to share. And then you will see at different fora that we go to every week, we're in different fora, we share again with more. More people will come, more countries, more administrations will come in. Let's just start.
Thank you. Good. That was a wonderful closing statement for this wonderful panel. Thank you very much.